Don't let mold steal your sleep. Hey, everybody, Dr. Martin Hart here. I'm here with Microbalance Health Products. Tonight, we're going to talk about mold. We're talking about how it can negatively impact your sleep, how to improve your recovery by improving your sleep. And we're going to introduce one of their new products that we've been using lately with my family and with patients. And we're going to talk all about that, you guys. First of all, a little disclaimer. Tonight's live production, it's for informational purposes only, not intended to treat, diagnose, or cure medical illness. More importantly, though, if you guys have questions, whether or not you're on YouTube or Instagram, type them in the chat box. I'll do my best to address them as we go. We love interacting with y'all. And thank you so much for having Microbalance Health Products, for having me on tonight, you guys. Hey, y'all, good to see you guys. Okay, so let's jump in tonight so we can get chatting here. So mold illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, sinusitis, right? Biotoxin illness, mold toxicity, all those sort of things can negatively impact your sleep. If you're dealing with a chronic illness, you've got Lyme disease, all those things, you know that all too well, how important sleep is to your recovery. I mean, heck, if you don't have Lyme disease and you're just a normal person who struggles with sleep nowadays, you know how debilitating it can be. So what we want to make sure tonight's call is that you understand how it relates to mold, some of the ways if you're dealing with mold, it can cause sleep issues. But most importantly, right? Most importantly, what can you do about it if you're dealing with mold? How can you help these sleep issues so you can recover, improve your health? So there's 3 ways that our bodies deal with mold. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 little lists here. There's 3 ways our bodies deal with mold. Number 1, you can have a mold toxicity. The mycotoxins that mold produces, it will negatively impact our system. We'll talk about that more. We call that toxicity or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, right? What's really crazy, guys, modern world, right? So EMFs, they aggravate mold. Mold's defense mechanism is to make mycotoxins. And so when there's EMF in the house and there's mold in the house, mold makes more mycotoxins. If there's multiple types of molds, those molds compete. They're like tribal warfare. They make more mycotoxins, right? Those are all biggies for us to think about. So that's one way it affects us. Number 2, you can have allergies, and we'll talk more about that as well. And number 3, you can have overgrowth. That's where, like, for instance, Dr. Dennis from Microbalance talks a lot about sinusitis, right? That's that overgrowth factor. It can overgrow in your gut, your lungs, your bronchioles, your throat, your sinuses, right? We see it on people's skin, ears, all sorts of crazy spots. So that's the 3 ways mold can affect you. But tonight we're going to talk about 5 ways that it drives sleep issues. Number 1 is those mycotoxins can cause what we call neuroendocrine disruption. They affect the hormones coming out of our brain and central nervous system. Okay. Number 2, they call hyperarousal. What's that mean? You get stuck in fight or flight. Okay. Number 3, they ramp up histamine. Number 4, they can cause respiratory distress. And 5, frequent urination. Okay. Getting up all night to pee. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into each one of those. And we're going to talk about how they affect our sleep, what's really going on there. By the time you're done, you're going to be more informed than the average primary care doctor on mold and how it affects your sleep, right? Don't go telling them that. They don't like that, but you will be by the time we're done. Okay, neuroendocrine disruption. Those are fancy words that basically all they really mean is the hormones that come out of our central nervous system, especially our pituitary, hypothalamus, and pineal gland, and then how they affect the rest of the hormonal pathways, okay? So that's the biggie there we want to look at. So when we inhale mycotoxins, we breathe them in, right? What happens is those mycotoxins can go right to the brain. And what they impact, especially, like I said, is our hypothalamus pituitary, which really work together to regulate systemic hormones in the whole body, okay? And so they can affect things like MSH, VIP, ADH, ACTH. What do all those things mean, right? So MSH is a biggie that regulates a lot of other things like fat loss. Okay, that's right. You got to wear these in the evening, you guys. Okay, wearing the blue blockers. So we got the blue light blocking glasses that helps my brain calm down even when we're in the light, so you can see me well. This allows my brain to know, hey, it's getting dark out. We need to start to chill out. So we use some great ones there. Anyone's work that really have that tint. Okay, so those different hormones like MSH, that affects energy, weight loss, skin pigmentation. That's why sometimes if you have mold illness, it's harder to get tan. It affects your immune function, endorphins for joy and pain reception, right? And so it also affects hormones like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, huge cascade. But importantly, it affects the way you also produce and regulate melatonin for your sleep. Okay. And that gets suppressed with mycotoxins. So our melatonin production gets dysregulated. Melatonin happens as our cortisol goes down, which is our stress hormone. It's also a hormone that keeps us awake. Our melatonin starts to go up at night, allows us to get that deep sleep, dreaming, brain detox, recovery, right? The other ones that get affected in there, ADH, I'll talk about later because it has to do with the urination. But then just waving to everybody here. Good to see you guys. And so then on top of that, we end up with ACTH being too high. That is our disrupted. That's our adrenocorticotropin releasing hormone. Blah, blah, blah. That's the one that our brain says, hey, adrenals, wake up, get moving, balance us out. Now, at first, when that gets lowered, that can help us sleep, right? If our hormones that wake us up get lowered at first, that helps us sleep. In the long run, as we get fatigued and we're having a hard time getting going to the day, our body never gets that feedback. It never says, hey, you really moved around today. Now you need to recover. It just gets this flat line. Our body does not like a flat line. It likes seasons. It likes changes. It likes night and day. That's everything life's about, right? So when we miss that, our body gets out of that rhythm to actually fall asleep, right? So it actually misses that rhythm, and that's negatively impacting that hormone function to allow us to sleep. So we can get all sorts of negative side effects around that, right? That we're talking about. But the biggie there is we're losing that circadian rhythm. We're losing that bounce. Says, hey, now it's time to sleep. Now it's time to wake up. We get that nasty flat line, wired but tired, insomniac, can't do anything because we're too fatigued to actually sleep, right? It leaves you exhausted. It leaves you feeling terrible, okay? The other thing that's really crazy about that is it leaves you way more sensitive to pain, right? Your pain receptors go crazy. So these folks a lot of times develop chronic pain syndromes at the same time. Guys, don't forget as we're going along too, throw your questions in the box. So that's the neuroendocrine pathway, right? That's the pathway there. The mycotoxins as you inhale them. Now, not only as you inhale them from your environment, right? But if you've got overgrowth in your sinuses or in your gut or in your lungs, you're chronically ingesting or inhaling internally those mycotoxins, which then feed that same way back. So you might be out of exposure, right? Your house might be clean now, might test well. But if you've got that overgrowth, then you know it's going to start affecting the brain still. So that's something you still need to address is the sinuses on that front. So that's the mycotoxin pathway that hits the hormones there. The next one is hyperarousal, fight or flight. We're stuck in go-go mode, right? Real feeling, real wired. And so these folks, a lot of times, they're norepinephrine, they're epinephrine, they're adrenaline, noradrenaline, they're cortisol. We'll talk about histamine in a moment. All those things are too high, and all those things stimulate our brain and nervous system. So we're too wired to actually sleep. Why does it do that? Well, mold and mycotoxins are a stress response. Our body is perceiving them as a threat because they're dangerous to us, right? You guys know that. If you're dealing with this, you know this stuff can be dangerous. And so that's a threat that happens. And so our system gets stuck in that wired but tired fight or flight response all the time. And then we have a difficulty falling asleep. Our mind is racing. We're restless. We can't sit still, right? Heaven forbid you already have a propensity. So for me, right, I've got the genetics that make me a little more prone to things like OCD or pandas. And so I'm a little more already kind of wired guy. And then you add in mold and this flight response, which further exacerbates that. As a kid and young adult in my 20s, I wasn't sleeping, right? Well, especially not at night, right? I was wandering the house at night at school or class, or every chance I had at work, I was sleeping. I can remember I worked a construction job. And so we had a 15-minute break in the morning. We had a 30-minute break at lunch, right? And sometimes we had another afternoon break if we had to work longer hours. I literally slept every single one of those breaks because I wasn't sleeping at night because I was too wired all the time. I was that terrible wired state at night because of this hyperarousal, this fight or flight response. So these folks a lot of times are anxious, probably have a lot of neuroticism, might have some obsessive compulsive tendencies. They've got racing thoughts, ruminating thoughts. They might feel hyped up. They might be restless. Okay. They might be super fidgety. And that's because our system is in a stress response. It feels threatened due to mold exposure because it is. Okay. Next one, and the one to really think about, were you tested for Lyme? Yeah, Lyme was not a biggie for me. I had mycoplasma, which is one of the co-infections. So mold and mycoplasma were my biggie, and I had strep. all the time. Strep throat constantly, many times a year for many years. They never took my tonsils, but I was on tons and tons of antibiotics as a kid because of that. Is pandas Lyme? That's a great question. So yes and no. So but for you guys who don't know, PANS-PANDA stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, or Pediatric Onset Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder associated with strep. So pandas is when it's with strep, where strep bacteria causes neuropsychiatric syndromes in kids, and adults can have this. The acronym just worse with ANDAS and it doesn't sound as good, but it's where that strep creates neuroinflammation. That neuroinflammation creates obsessive compulsive tendencies, motor tics, all sorts of problems, right? And so that's where we get into hyperarousal with mold too, because that neuroinflammatory state that the mycotoxins and mold spores create. And then PANS is when other triggers can trigger that neuropsychiatric syndrome. So that can be mold, mycoplasma, Lyme, right? So a lot of these kids do have Lyme, Bartonella, et cetera. Parasites, we're seeing it in COVID now, right? Any one of those things, sometimes heavy metals can trigger that. Usually there's a genetic component, at least with the kids I treat. There's a genetic component. 100% of them, guys, and this is in my case, I've reviewed this in my case files. 100% of PANS-PANDAS kids have had a mold exposure, a toxic mold exposure that's high enough to measure in the urine. Okay. 100% of the kids that we've worked with in our clinic have that. So that's hyperarousal, right? That's that fight or flight that gets triggered because of the neuroinflammatory state and mycotoxin exposure. Thank you for the questions, guys. We love hitting those up on that front. Next is histamine. Okay, histamine we think of with allergies, but it's really a hormone and neurotransmitter. It's especially important in our brain. It keeps us awake. That's why antihistamines make you sleepy, because histamine's job in our brain is to keep you awake. And so it's keeping you awake on that front, but it's also regulating your other neurotransmitters. Is an oat test that measures, could you ask that question a little differently? I can talk about the oats test if you want, but tell me what you want to measure on the oats test so we can look at that from there. And so histamine is what keeps us awake, but it also causes, GI issues, allergies, functions, all that sort of thing, pain issues, rashes, hives, right? And so it drives that. Well, when one of the things, there's two big things that really can drive a lot of, so the oats test stands for organic acids test. Okay. It's a way we measure different organic acids and metabolites in our urine. It's a great total body test. We use it a lot for all patients, but especially kids, because you don't need the blood draw, right? Makes it easier, especially for these neurodivergent kiddos. And so it can measure urine mycotoxins, measures some of the fungal metabolites, not a ton, but it gives us an idea. I'll tell you what, though, if you're seeing any of the yeast or fungal metabolites high on an organic acids test, it means that person's fungal load or mycotoxin load is very high. So what we also measure in these kids is a urine mycotoxin test, which is directly measuring the mycotoxin or mold toxin load in the urine. And that's just for the mold toxins. So what we see is if somebody oats test is a little elevated on there in the organic acids for fungus and yeast, then their urine mycotoxin test is usually going to be absolutely high, right? So having a negative result on the oats does not rule out mold, but when it's elevated on there, it definitely rules it in. And almost every single time, if it's high on the oats, it's astronomically high on the urine mycotoxin, or their home test really, really high. And so if you've got high mycotoxins and high mold, high fungus, that triggers high histamine. Our body releases histamine in a response to try to get it out, right? But if you're perpetually exposed to it or have overgrowth, then we know that it's going to trigger constant histamine. That's going to keep you awake. So for a lot of these folks, they might get itchy, rashy, uncomfortable, hot, right? Prickly heat, overstimulated thoughts. That's a lot of times can be histamine. If yours were all low in the oats, you still want to measure mycotoxins if you think it's a factor, right? So if you're low in the oats, it does not rule it out by any means. Okay, I've seen absolutely rock bottom low fungal metabolites on the organic acids test and really high urine mycotoxins. They're just slightly different measures, right? And so you can still definitely have that. So I would say if you're considering that you might have mold exposure or mold illness or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, go ahead and do a urine mycotoxin test. The other thing is that histamine And mold can stimulate mast cell activation syndrome, which are mast cells, which are immune defense cells. Their job especially is to attack fungus, mold, and parasites. They release a lot of stuff like histamine, also serotonin, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, right? So we can get that. Those folks become sensitive to almost anything, almost allergic to stress even. So now imagine that you're got mold, right? So you got this neuroendocrine response. You're stuck in fight or flight. You've got histamine going, and then now you've got mast cell activation, which it has your mast cells have a stress receptor on there, where CRH is a stress hormone. And so every time you get stressed, it releases more histamine, which creates more stress, right? Sleep can be difficult for these folks. Now, there's hope there, right? There's things you can do, which we'll talk about, but that can really lead to some sleeplessness for those folks. And sometimes it leads to things like over reliance on Benadryl and things like that to sleep, which we don't want to do if we can help it. Okay. So that's histamine release. We're getting down to our last two, you guys. Okay. So, right, we talked about how histamine can be a sinus or a gut or a lung overgrowth. Mold can be a lung, sinus, or bronchial lung overgrowth in the gut too. We talked about how it can be mycotoxins from the exposure or even allergies. So, right, if you're allergic to histamine, you are allergic to mold, you're going to produce a ton of histamine, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And now we're getting to the fourth one, which is respiratory distress. Okay. And so as you either get the sinus and lung overgrowth or the mycotoxins themselves cause breathing difficulties, they can cause asthma, congestion, right? You're going to have a hard time breathing, especially at night if you're living in a moldy space. Or you might mouth breathe, right? So mouth breathing can really negatively impact brain function, blood sugar, recovery, sleep. Sleep apnea really takes years off people's lifespan. Okay, but it makes it really difficult at that point then to actually get good quality sleep. If you're suddenly waking up and coughing all the time, you're not going to sleep well. If you can't get into deep sleep because you can't breathe through your nose, your recovery is going to be down. So respiratory distress is a big one that happens due to mold exposure. Asthma, with every case of asthma, every case of sinusitis, every case of nighttime nasal congestion, you have to rule out mold exposure. Okay, if you're not ruling out mold exposure, then you're not looking at the full picture. Guys, if you get more than one sinus infection in your lifetime, if you get 1, 2, 3 sinus infections a year, you have mold exposure that you absolutely must be getting taken care of. What I can't sort out is feeling exhausted, but still not being able to stay or fall asleep. Can you explain that a little? For sure. So that's partially that neuroendocrine response, right? That hormone feedback we were talking about. Because if you're exhausted during the day and you never actually can go ahead and expend energy, right? Enough energy, your body never gets that feedback. What the body needs is sleep time recover energy, daytime use energy. Nighttime recover, daytime use. That night and day cycle, that feedback that's so important for the design of our body allows us to get in deep sleep. But over time, as you're more and more exhausted, you're not sleeping as much because your body is never getting the signal to actually fall asleep. It says, I never expanded enough energy to actually fall asleep. So we're missing that neuroendocrine, that hormonal neurotransmitter feedback loop that actually allows us to get into that sleepy state and get into that deep recovery state, because your body gets this weird message of, I'm not expending enough energy to recover, and I'm not recovering enough to expend energy. Could that insomnia be from Lyme? 100% Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella. Those can also cause insomnia. They can cause a lot of neuropsychiatric issues, neurotransmitter imbalances. That causes a lot of Lyme. Here's what we find, and we've got another great live on this with Microbalance, is that chronic Lyme. Check it out on the YouTube page or on social media. Is that chronic Lyme is a lot of times mold exposure, because what's not allowing that Lyme to be cleared out is immune suppression from the mold. Okay, so that's a biggie for us to check out there. If you're dealing with Lyme, is you need to look at mold. Lyme by itself. Okay, I just gave a presentation this weekend. All these practitioners are wide-eyed as I'm saying this, right? If you just have Lyme, it's relatively easy to deal with. Okay, because it's just an immune issue, right? It's a microbe that we need to help the body clear out. It's when there's Lyme plus mold, Lyme plus heavy metals, whatever it is, plus, that's when Lyme gets complicated and tricky. I want you guys to keep thinking about that. Okay, last thing of those 5 things that mold I see do quite often for causing sleeplessness is frequent urination, right? If you're getting up to pee all night, hey, shout out to older guys with prostate issues, right? Gonna get some hate mail for that. That if you're up all night peeing, right, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you're not going to sleep well. Now, heaven forbid you have that, and you've got hyperarousal. You're stuck in fight or flight. So the second you wake up, now your brain's going, right? Now you're going to struggle to go back to sleep. So if you're peeing all night, then you're not going to sleep well. Why would you be peeing all night with mycotoxin exposure? Well, mycotoxins, they get in that pituitary gland. Remember, guys, how we said it suppresses hormone function? Well, it suppresses a specific hormone called ADH, antidiuretic hormone. That hormone's job is to help you retain the right amount of fluid and electrolytes. Okay. If you're urinating all the time, and we see this, we measure it in the blood labs, it gets suppressed with mold exposure. Okay. Dr. Dennis wrote a great research article on that and growth hormone and all that. It gets suppressed with mold exposure. And so you're urinating and you can't stay hydrated. How do you know? You shock people all the time with static electricity. You have muscle twitches. You get cramps easy. Okay. You're constipated because you're dehydrated. Okay. That's from this ADH suppression that happens. And then you can't actually retain enough water to then stay hydrated. And so every water you drink, you're peeing it right out, right? And so then you got to drink more water to stay hydrated, then you got to pee even more. Okay. And what happens for some of these folks is they start restricting fluids so that somebody said I should turn on super chats. I don't know what that means, but if it's helpful, I'll figure it out. Okay. So running that. Okay. So we'll see if that helps. Try to turn that on there, guys. Okay. So, and if that's, you're not retaining that fluid, not staying hydrated, then you're going to drink more water, right? You're going to feel terrible, muscle twitches, that sort of stuff. And you can't sleep at night, more difficult to recover. Many moles have frequent urination with this. Okay. So we're going to talk about what you can do about it. And guys, don't forget, feel free to ask your questions in there. So I'm going to answer a couple as we go too, because we had a couple submitted early in the week. So let's see. Somebody says, what mattress do you suggest for sleeping? So first of all, okay, the most important part here is you need to find a mattress that allows you to be comfortable, not sore in the morning, and then wake up refreshed. Okay, so you need to find that mattress. I say start there first. I'm more concerned about the recovery and sleep you're getting than if you have the world's most organic mattress. Because what can we do? What we do is if we can't find a mattress that's perfect in our home, we find one that's close, and then we can sleep well in, and then we cover an organic sealed mattress cover. Okay, either bamboo, a lot of times mattress cover. And so that's a biggie there that we want to make sure we do. And then, if you want to get an organic latex, there's different brands that are pretty good out there, EcoTerra, those sort of things. But organic latex, organic bamboo mattresses are great. But find one that allows you to sleep and recover. If you need to cover it then in like an organic bamboo or organic waterproof mattress cover, do that, close it in. Or then if you can find a good organic latex one that you tolerate well, that's a great option on there. So, okay, how do you know? Number two, like into this as you're going, like what to do about it. First, you want to create a sleep sanctuary in your room. You want to make sure your room is mold-free as possible. And this will go into one of the questions which I asked. So how do you do that? You do your mold plate testing. EC3 has great mold plates, right? That help you test. You can also do the ERMI testing in there. That's Environmental Relative Moldy Index. But plate testing, here's how I recommend you do this. Okay, I want you to test the carpet. You take the plate. Let me see if I got one laying around. Okay, you take the plate and you tap test it, okay, on the mattress. You seal it up. You take another plate, you tap test it on your carpet, seal it up. You leave it out, sitting out, like on your nightstand for an hour, seal it up after that. Tape one to your HVAC, or if it's on the floor or ceiling, tape one to your HVAC vent for an hour, seal it up. Let those plates cook for 5 to 7 days. See how much is growing on there. Typically we say if it's more than 4, that's too many spores. I think more than 2 is too many spores to be a healthy room. Then if that's the issue, right, you can look for the source. You can hire a good inspector to help you figure out where the source is at. You can start fogging with EC3 solution. You can start using the enzyme spray, the mold wipes, start cleaning up. Use a HEPA vacuum regularly. Wash your sheets frequently. in EC3 mold additive. We want to lower the mold load. Guys, this weekend, unfortunately, the hotel we were at for the conference was a little bit moldy. What did we do? We brought our mold candles with us. Massive difference. Okay. So burn those in your room. It's a nice atmosphere for the evening, right? You're getting ready for bed. What are we doing? We're turning the lights off so we can block the blue light. And then we're going to light a mold candle to lower the mold and mycotoxin in the air and create a little nice ambiance, right? Okay. Tons of questions coming in. Let's look at some of these questions. What helps with body vibrations caused from mold exposure when trying to sleep? Okay, a couple different things cause the body vibrations. I do see that dehydration from the ADH can cause body vibrations. Actually, if you're getting muscle tremors, twitches, muscle spasms, fasciculations, cramping, can cause those vibrations. And so, number one, staying hydrated. What helps with that? Plenty of salt and cream of tartar for potassium in your water, coconut water. Okay. And then you want to make sure you're taking your toxin binders, because you get those toxin binders in, get some mold spores and mold toxins out, helps to raise ADH. Guys, the other thing that helps with that, I find is really, really helpful, and it pairs really well. So we'll use this now to introduce, because it's going to answer a couple questions. Mycobalance's new product, Sleep, which is a homeopathic support for sleep. I find it pairs really well with Celtropin, which is for hormone recovery from microbalance. Those two do help to repair that ADH pathway that can cause some of the body vibrations. At that, cream of tartar is a really good source of potassium. 1 teaspoon has almost 500 milligrams of potassium, and you can find it organically sourced. The other thing with body vibrations, that can be low iron, that can be low dopamine, causing restlessness. Bartonella, Babesia can cause inner trembling, which are Lyme co-infections, which mold allows to perpetuate. So you might have to deal with those. You might need to take some magnesium or calcium even to help the body and nervous system calm down. You might need to do a little extra movement right before bed, some gentle rhythmic breathing and stretching, right? Get everything stretched out. You might need to shake it out before bed, get all that stuff cleared out. I've tried all the meds and supplements for sleep and nothing works. What do you recommend for hyperarousal and histamine issues for sleep? First of all, deal with the source. If it's mold, you got to deal with the mold in the home. Okay, that's number one. Number two, we want to remember that we're not just trying to use natural methods to clear our symptoms. We're wanting to look for the root cause. So at Keystone, we're trying to find that keystone that's holding your case together. So if sleep's the issue, we want to find that keystone, that root cause that's holding it together, and pull it out, right? So if it's mold, we have to deal with the mold. We also have to deal with the lifestyle patterns. So we might need to turn down the lights 1 to 2 hours before bed, wear the blue light glasses, got to get off the screens, right? Computers, iPads, phones, got to get off those screens 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. We need to start lowering that hypoarousal. So we might need to do a breath routine, an Epsom salt bath, which both helps relax us, improve magnesium, and detoxifies us. Okay. A lot of times breath work, okay, is really good here. The other thing I'm doing is teaching patients how to deal with their emotions, right? We might do some tapping work. Okay. I might have them do some journaling before bed. We've got to lower that sympathetic tone at that point. Another thing that people miss is potassium, which is low a lot of times in moldies because of the ADH. We just pee it out. Potassium helps calm our sympathetic dominance. Okay. It helps to relax us quite a bit at that point. So we need to find that root cause there. The other thing we're seeing with Sleep is it works great for sleep support, right? It's not a medication. It's helping to reteach the body how to do these things. I had a patient today. We were doing a virtual follow-up. He said, Dr. Hart, I've been using the Sleep. It knocks me out. That was his verbiage. It knocks me out, right? He's sleeping great with it. Okay. So Sleep is a great one. Now, I'm not saying it's going to knock you out first time, but it's going to help retrain your body so it can do these things, right? So this is a great one. I will tell you, though, the first time I used it, Microbalance sent it to me as to beta test, try it out. And so I've got my Whoop watch, helps me track recovery, right? My recovery score went up 10%. And I keep a really good track of this, right? So I know what's driving my sleep at any point because I'm keeping track of all these metrics. What did I eat? What supplements did I take? What stressors did I have that day, right? And so I on and off tried it. 10% improvement. Took it back, back down to my normal baseline. My recovery is pretty good most nights. It's in the green, but having a 10% bump means I'm recovering even better. I've got more energy, more brain power the next day, right? Retake the spray, boom, 10% bump again. So I know it's the sleep affecting that. Is it a homeopathic? It is a homeopathic. And guys, I do have a great article on sinusitis wellness, understanding homeopathics. What they're doing is giving information to our body and nervous system of how to deal with those stressors that we're talking about, specifically here with sleep. Okay. So histamine issues too with sleep, you've got to deal with the stressors, right? The things that are driving histamine. Is it mold? Is there foods driving histamine, right? If you went to Mexican that night and you had avocados, that's going to drive histamine. Avocados drive histamine, so you might not sleep as well. Okay, so we got to look at these factors that might be driving it. Okay, out to eat with family, but watch later. Yeah, thanks, Tools and Tactics. Yeah, I'd love for you to watch it, share it if you enjoy it. Okay, guys, we're getting close to time, but I want to make sure that we get how you're going to deal with this. And I got a couple more questions, so I'm going to just roll with it. Stay here if you've got it, okay? Will OSLEEP help while unfortunately still living in mold? OSLEEP can help while still living in mold because it's supporting the body's natural process that it does it. But I also recommend you support your body's detox channels at that point, and you start trying to fight back against the mold by looking at things like dealing with things like at that point, right? Foggers, like fogging the EC3 solution, air purifiers, right? That sort of stuff, burning the EC3 candles, making a sleep sport. Why are oxalates so bad? Number one, oxalates can show up with yeast and fungus and mold, but they're like little glass shards. Oxalic acid, oxalates, they bind to calcium, they bind to our minerals, so they keep us from absorbing the minerals, but then they actually do things like they poke our bladder. They can get to our joints. They can cause what feels like broken glass in the bottom of our feet. They stimulate our GI tract, right? They irritate our GI tract. They can irritate our nervous system. So oxalates can be really hard on the body, causing pain syndromes, painful urethritis, right? For that sort of thing. They can cause bladder irritation, feel like you have UTIs even when you don't, that sort of thing. Which products to improve sleep with mold toxicity? So we talked about it, right? We can use sleep to help retrain that pathway. I want you to start detoxing. You can use bioactive binder, right? A lot of these things are available on Microbalance, guys. So you can use bioactive binder to start doing that NAC. Here's what's great about NAC. NAC helps us detoxify. It's a great antioxidant. It also lowers glutamate, which is stimulatory, okay, in our brain. So it helps us lower glutamate in our brain, which can help us with anxiety and sleep patterns. Okay, so we want to start detoxing. We want to lower histamine. We might, for some folks, look at quercetin, NAC, stinging nettle, black cumin seed. All these things help to naturally lower histamine, which can help calm us down. Okay, so those are big. We want to clear the sinuses. We want to use a good nasal spray, NasoPure nasal flushing, right? We want to get those things out. So we want to use maybe an air purifier. Somebody says, well, an air purifier, get rid of mold spores effectively. Air purifiers are not enough to deal with mold in your house, but they will lower the total inflammatory load. So they will trap mold spores and mycotoxins. You need to make sure it's a HEPA filter or better, but it was not enough to deal with the problem, but it will effectively help lower the inflammatory load. Okay, a lot of times I say, look, if you know you got mold, at least throw an air purifier where you're spending 8 pure hours, which is your room. Throw an air purifier in your room, okay? Then we're going to start repairing sleep. We're going to use things. So this is, you can read some of this too in my sinusitis wellness article. We're going to use things like pair with OSLEEP and Celtropin to repair that circadian rhythm. So you can use them together, but sometimes what I like to do, OSLEEP at night, Celtropin in the morning, okay? Repair that circadian rhythm, get that rolling so your body knows make energy in the morning, sleep and recovery at night. Try to make your bedroom sleep only as much as possible, right? We say the bedroom is for making Z's and making babies, okay? That's what we try to use the bedroom for only. We don't want to spend a bunch of time reading or doing other things in the bedroom as much as possible. Keep it your sleep sanctuary, okay? Other things you can do at bedtime is Epsom salt baths, magnesium, especially magnesium glycinate, great for sleep at that point. We'll use other specific things to help drive sleep depending on what the person's going on, their hormone balance. And then we want to make sure that we're doing things for us. We're doing deep breathing work, right? Breath work. Right before bed to help slow our heart rate down, balance us out, right? We might want to use breathing strips and mouth tape to open us up. Okay. We might want to use brain dumping and journaling before bed to drop that. So, guys, look, what did we talk about tonight? We talked about the 5 ways mold impacts sleep. It disrupts neuroendocrine function because of mycotoxins. It causes hyperarousal, fight or flight due to that neuroinflammation. It raises histamine, which overstimulates us, right? It causes respiratory distress, which makes it difficult to get in deep sleep. And then lastly, it causes you to pee all the time, frequent urination, which keeps you up all the night. And then we talked about how to deal with it. You got to deal with mold in your environment, which EC3 makes great products to do that. You got to start detoxifying. You want to repair your sleep with things like Celtropin and Sleep. You guys, you got to try this, okay? The other thing with that, the first night I gave it to myself, gave it to my family. I'm the first one up. I'm the early riser, right? So it's usually me up, then my daughter, then my youngest son goes to work out with me, and then everybody else is starting to give up. Man, that first morning, everybody was out cold, couldn't hardly get anybody up. Nobody was moving, right? They were in deep sleep that night. You guys, patients are loving this. So give it a try, right? Some sleep. Give it at least a couple of weeks to let it repair that sleep cycle. But you got to do the other things. You got to take care of the mold. You got to make sure you're practicing good sleep hygiene, right? You can't drink a cup of coffee and Diet Coke before bed, stare at your phone up until the last minute, and then spray some sleep and hope that it's going to fix all your problems. We got to make sure we're doing it as part of an effective plan. But if you're not sleeping and you're doing all the right things, give it a try, because that's what we've seen it help with. Okay, guys, check this out. Share it on YouTube, share it on Instagram. Okay, follow the page. We've got lots of great stuff here with Microbalance, tons of articles on sinusitis wellness. We're happy to have you here. Tune in for the next one. Send in your questions. Let me make sure I got this done. Okay, air purifier, products for sleep. We talked about it. What are the top 4 products you recommend if you're on a tight budget for mold toxicity? Get a nasal spray, Citri drops. Get a binder like Bioactive Binder. Okay, bind up those mycotoxins. Okay, at that front. Do something that's antihistamine like quercetin or NAC. Okay, that's 3. Number 4, support a specific issue you might be dealing with. If it's energy, maybe look at Celtropin. If it's sleep, something like Sleep. Pick the 4 that are going to directly help you, though. Okay. All right, you guys. Thank you, Microbalance Health Products. I'm Dr. Hart. Check us out at Keystone Total Health if I can help you. Thank you again, guys, for having us. Take care and good night.